Boy spotted sleeping in a laundromat every night. Sheriff starts crying after discovering the reason. But first, remember to subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing incredible stories. The town of White Pines was the kind of place where change came slowly, if at all. Nestled in the heart of Montana, it was known for its rolling hills, cozy diners, and close-knit community. But for Sheriff Frank Collins, a man in his early 40s with a weathered face and a reputation for fairness, it was also a place that sometimes held secrets too quiet to hear until they demanded attention. During his nightly patrols, Frank had started noticing something odd. The faint silhouette of a boy curled up on the plastic chairs of the 24-hour laundromat on Elm Street. It wasn't unusual to see someone taking shelter there during a storm or on a particularly cold night, but this boy was there every night. He wasn't causing trouble, just sleeping, a thin blanket wrapped tightly around him as he rested his head on a bundled hoodie. Curiosity piqued. Frank parked his cruiser near the laundromat one evening, pretending to review paperwork as he kept an eye on the glass windows. The boy, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, was skinny and small, his clothes plain but clean, as if he took pride in keeping himself presentable despite his circumstances. Frank watched as the boy brushed crumbs off his jacket, carefully folded the blanket, and tucked it into a corner before settling down again. The laundromat's flickering fluorescent lights buzzed softly when Frank walked in, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. "Hey there," Frank greeted casually, trying not to startle him. "You've been here a lot lately." The boy flinched but didn't run. His wide green eyes darted to Frank's badge and then to the door as if calculating an escape route. "I'm just resting," he said quietly. Frank crouched to meet his gaze, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm not here to hassle you. Just want to make sure you're okay. You got a name, kid?" The boy hesitated before answering. "Ethan." "All right, Ethan," Frank said, settling onto one of the plastic chairs a few feet away. "You've been sleeping here for a while. This isn't exactly home, is it?" Ethan tightened his arms around his knees, offering no answer. The silence hung heavy between them until the boy finally muttered, "It's just for now." Frank nodded, choosing not to press further. He could see Ethan's resolve to stay hidden, but as a sheriff and a father of 2 grown children, he couldn't just walk away. After a moment, he stood. "If you ever need anything, you let me know, all right? I'll be around." Ethan gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Back in his cruiser, Frank sat staring at the laundromat for a long moment. This wasn't just a boy in need of a warm place for one night. This was something deeper, and as a man who had spent his life protecting the people of White Pines, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's story was about to uncover more than anyone in town was ready for. The days turned into a pattern, too. Every night, Ethan returned to the laundromat, and every night, Frank kept a quiet watch. He didn't approach again right away. The boy was skittish, and Frank knew from experience that trust wasn't built overnight. Still, the sight of Ethan huddled on the hard chairs under the stark fluorescent lights was a constant knot in Frank's stomach. One evening, Frank decided to dig deeper. A call to the local school district revealed that Ethan had been enrolled until a few months prior, but his attendance had abruptly stopped. "No transfer records," the clerk on the phone said. "Just gone." The sheriff's next stop was the county records office. Flipping through the sparse information, he discovered Ethan's full name, Ethan Calloway, and a connection to a now-defunct orphanage on the outskirts of town. The building had been closed months ago due to financial struggles, its remaining wards relocated. But somehow, Ethan had slipped through the cracks. Armed with this knowledge, Frank returned to the laundromat that night. Ethan was there, as always, his back against the wall, a battered book in his hands. Frank brought 2 cups of hot cocoa from the diner down the street and placed one beside the boy. "Thought you might like this. It's getting chilly tonight." Ethan eyed the cup suspiciously, but didn't refuse. After a few sips, he glanced at Frank. Why do you keep coming here? Frank leaned back in his chair, cradling his own cup. Because I'm the sheriff, and I care about the people in this town, even the ones who think no one notices them. For a moment, Ethan said nothing, staring into the steaming cup as if searching for answers. Finally, he mumbled, "The orphanage shut down. I didn't want to go to another one. They'd separate me from Max." "Max?" Frank asked, raising an eyebrow. "My dog," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. "He's all I have left." Frank's brow furrowed. "Where is he now?" Ethan hesitated, then pointed toward the woods. "I keep him hidden near the river. It's not safe for him in town." Frank's heart sank. A boy, barely in his teens, sleeping in a laundromat and hiding his dog in the woods. It was a recipe for disaster. "Ethan," he began cautiously, "this isn't sustainable. You're just a kid. You shouldn't have to live like this." Ethan bristled. "I don't need anyone's help. I can take care of myself and Max." Frank sighed, sensing the steel in the boy's words. "All right, I hear you. But if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." As the days passed, Frank kept looking for ways to help. He drove by the old orphanage, now boarded up and overgrown, and thought about the boy who had been left behind. At the same time, he asked around town discreetly about Ethan's family. He learned that Ethan's father had died the previous year, leaving behind debts he couldn't pay. The sheriff's heart ached as he pieced together the boy's grim reality. The situation took a darker turn when Frank overheard a conversation at the local diner. A burly man with a mean streak, known as Clyde Harper, was bragging about collecting on old debts. "That Calloway kid? If I find him, maybe he knows where his daddy stashed the rest of the cash." Frank's blood ran cold. It wasn't just poverty or neglect pushing Ethan into hiding. There was danger, and the boy knew it. Harper was a man with a history of intimidation, and if he was after Ethan, things could escalate quickly. Frank left the diner with a determined stride. Protecting Ethan wasn't just an act of kindness anymore. It was a necessity. The boy's life was at stake, and Frank was willing to do whatever it took to keep him safe. Frank's resolve to protect Ethan grew stronger with every passing day. He couldn't shake the image of the boy's tired, guarded eyes, or the mention of Clyde Harper's menacing interest. The sheriff knew he needed to act, but rushing would only push Ethan further into hiding. Trust had to come first. One crisp autumn evening, Frank made his move. He pulled into the laundromat parking lot with a bag of cheeseburgers and fries from the diner, placing the food on the counter near Ethan without a word. The boy hesitated before grabbing a burger and devouring it with the hunger of someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. "Thanks," Ethan muttered between bites, his defenses slightly lowered. Frank sat across from him, his tone casual. "Ethan, I know you're scared, but I can't help you unless you let me in. Whatever you're dealing with, I'll do my best to make it right." Ethan's eyes darted to the window, scanning for any threats before he spoke. "It's not just me. If they find me, they'll hurt Max. I can't let that happen." Frank leaned forward, his voice steady. "Who are they, Ethan? Are you talking about Clyde Harper?" The boy froze, his face pale. "You know about him?" Frank nodded. "I've heard enough to know he's trouble. And if he's after you, then you're not safe here. Not in this laundromat, not in this town." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he clutched the edge of the table. "He thinks my dad left something valuable, but I don't know anything about it. Dad didn't have much when he died." Frank could see the weight of the boy's words. "Ethan, you don't have to carry this on your own. If Harper's coming after you, I can stop him. But I need to know the truth. What's he looking for?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting Harper to burst in at any moment. Finally, he whispered, "Before my dad passed, he told me he had something important. A folder." He said it would make things better for us, but he never told me what was in it or where it was. Frank felt a flicker of hope. A folder. Do you have any idea where it might be? Ethan shook his head. No. I searched everywhere. Our old house, his truck, even the orphanage before it closed. Nothing. The pieces of the puzzle began to align in Frank's mind. If the folder existed, it might hold the key to resolving not only Ethan's troubles, but also Harper's dangerous interest. But there was no telling how much time they had before Harper made his move. Determined to act, Frank offered a plan. Ethan, I know you don't want to leave Max. Let's go get him. You can both stay at my place for now, just until we figure this out. I'll keep you safe. I promise. Ethan looked at him, his face a mixture of doubt and yearning. You mean it? You won't take Max away? Scout's honor, Frank said, raising a hand solemnly. The boy gave a small nod, and together they left the laundromat. Frank drove to the woods near the river, where Ethan whistled softly. Moments later, a shaggy golden retriever bounded out of the brush, tail wagging furiously. Ethan dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. This is Max, he said, his voice filled with relief. Frank smiled. He's a good boy. Let's get you both out of here. As they returned to Frank's house, the sheriff couldn't ignore the feeling that they were racing against time. Harper wasn't the type to wait patiently, and Frank suspected the man was already circling closer. Back at the house, Frank set up a spare room for Ethan and Max, ensuring they were as comfortable as possible. He called his deputy, Sarah, to share what he'd learned. I need you to keep tabs on Harper, Frank instructed. If he starts stirring up trouble, I want to know immediately. Got it, boss, Sarah replied, her tone serious. As the night wore on, Ethan and Max fell asleep in the room. But Frank sat in his living room, sipping coffee and piecing together the clues. If the folder was real, it had to be somewhere connected to Ethan's father. The old orphanage seemed the most likely place to start. The next morning, Frank woke Ethan gently. I'm going to check out the orphanage today. Stay here and keep Max close. Sarah will be around to look after you. Ethan hesitated but finally nodded. Okay, just be careful. Frank gave him a reassuring smile. I will. As he stepped out into the crisp morning air, Frank couldn't shake the sense of urgency. The stakes were climbing, and it was clear that Harper wasn't just chasing money, he was chasing something far more dangerous. Frank's truck rumbled along the gravel road, leading to the old orphanage. The building stood like a forgotten relic, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. Overgrown weeds and vines crept up the walls, whispering stories of abandonment. The air felt heavy, and Frank couldn't shake the feeling that whatever secrets this place held were ready to surface. He pushed the rusty gate open and stepped onto the cracked path leading to the front door. The place was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, Frank pried the door open, the groan of wood and metal echoing in the empty halls. Inside, the orphanage was a haunting blend of decay and memory. Dust motes floated in the beams of sunlight, filtering through cracks in the boards, and old furniture lay scattered, some of it broken. Frank moved methodically, checking every room and corner, his boots stirring up faint clouds of dust. He found nothing in the office or dining hall, only faded ledgers and scraps of forgotten paperwork. Finally, he reached the attic, a cramped space filled with old trunks, boxes, and forgotten relics of the past. It was there, hidden beneath a pile of discarded blankets, that Frank found a small metal box. The box was locked, but the weight of it suggested it held something significant. Frank took it to the truck, pried it open with his crowbar, and found a single folder inside. Its contents were protected by a layer of plastic, but the label on the front read, Callaway, Property Deed, White Pines. Frank's pulse quickened as he scanned the documents. It was a deed for the land where the orphanage stood. Ethan's father hadn't left money, but had left something even more valuable: a legal claim to the orphanage property. If this deed was valid, it could be sold or even leveraged to reopen the orphanage, providing Ethan and others like him a safe place to live. Frank's victory was short-lived. As he stepped outside, he noticed a dark SUV parked near his truck. Clyde Harper leaned against it, flanked by two burly men. The sight of them sent a chill through Frank's spine. Harper's smile was anything but friendly. "Sheriff Collins," Harper drawled, his voice oily with menace. "Seems we're both interested in the same thing." Frank's grip on the folder tightened. "You've got no business here, Harper. Leave." Harper's eyes flicked to the folder. Now. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. That belongs to me." "It belongs to Ethan," Frank said firmly, stepping closer. Harper's smile twisted into a sneer. "That boy's got nothing. His daddy owed me, and I'm here to collect." Frank's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "This deed isn't yours. The courts will back it up. Now get off this property before I have you arrested for trespassing." The tension crackled like a live wire. Harper's men shifted, their posture aggressive, but Frank's hand hovered near his holstered firearm. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he wasn't going to let Harper take the folder. "You think you're some kind of hero, Collins?" Harper spat. "You can't protect that boy forever." Frank's voice was cold steel. "Try me." For a moment it seemed Harper might push his luck, but after a long, tense silence, he nodded to his men. "Let's go." As they drove away, Frank's hands trembled with the adrenaline still coursing through him. He didn't trust that Harper would give up so easily, but for now, he had what he needed. When Frank returned home, Ethan was sitting on the porch with Max, his face lighting up with relief when he saw the sheriff. "Did you find anything?" Ethan asked. Frank handed him the folder, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Your dad didn't leave money, but he left this. It's the deed to the orphanage. With this, we can help you, and maybe a lot of other kids too." Ethan's hands trembled as he took the folder. "You mean we could reopen it?" Frank nodded, a smile breaking through his weariness. "We're going to try, but we've got to be careful. Harper won't give up that easily." That night, Frank made calls to trusted friends in the community, rallying support to safeguard the deed. They worked late into the night, drawing up plans to secure the property and ensure Harper couldn't interfere. But Harper was faster than Frank anticipated. Early the next morning, Frank woke to the sound of shattering glass. Rushing outside, he saw flames licking at the edges of his shed. It was arson, Harper's message, loud and clear. Frank called the fire department and got the flames under control before they could spread to the house. Ethan stood beside him, pale and trembling. "It's my fault," the boy whispered. Frank placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "This isn't your fault, Ethan. Harper's trying to scare us, but we won't let him win." Looking at the smoldering ruins, Frank knew the time for caution was over. It was time to confront Harper head-on. The early morning sun cast a faint orange glow over the ruins of Frank's shed as he stood with Ethan and Max, both visibly shaken. The acrid smell of smoke lingered in the crisp air, a bitter reminder of Harper's latest threat. Frank's jaw tightened. He wasn't about to let a thug like Harper scare him or Ethan into submission. After ensuring Ethan and Max were safe with Deputy Sarah at the station, Frank drove straight to Harper's known hideout, a rundown warehouse on the edge of White Pines. The place reeked of oil and stale beer, a fitting lair for a man like Harper. Frank stepped inside, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. Harper was there, lounging in a makeshift office surrounded by his lackeys. His smug expression faltered when he saw Frank enter, hand resting conspicuously on the butt of his holstered gun. "Sheriff," Harper greeted with a smirk. "What brings you to my humble abode?" Frank didn't flinch. "This ends now, Harper. You've crossed the line. Arson, intimidation, threatening a child. You're done." Harper chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You don't scare me, Collins. That deed belongs to me, and you know it." Frank took a step closer, his voice sharp as a blade. "That deed is Ethan's. The courts will back it up, and I'll make sure you spend the next decade behind bars if you come near him again." The room tensed as Harper's goons exchanged uneasy glances. Harper leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "You really think you can protect that kid? I've got more men, more money, and more time than you." Frank didn't waver. "You might have all that, but you don't have the law on your side. I've already filed charges for the fire, and my deputies are gathering evidence as we speak. If you're smart, you'll leave town before I lock you up for good." The silence was heavy, charged with tension. Finally, Harper slammed his fists on the table, frustration flashing across his face. "You're making a mistake, Collins." "No," Frank said, his voice calm but firm. "The only mistake here is yours. Stay away from Ethan, or I'll make sure you regret it." Frank left the warehouse, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. Back at the station, he found a group of community leaders waiting, drawn by the news of the deed. They were eager to help secure the orphanage and protect Ethan's legacy. "We've already got volunteers ready to clean the place up," said Mary Jensen, the town librarian. "If we can get the paperwork sorted, we can reopen the orphanage within months." Ethan watched from the corner of the room, hope flickering in his eyes. "You really think it'll work?" he asked Frank. Frank knelt down to meet his gaze. "I know it will. Your dad left you something important, and we're going to make sure it helps you and a lot of other kids." Over the following weeks, the community rallied together. The deed was validated by the county, and plans to renovate the orphanage gained momentum. Harper, sensing the tide turning against him, fled town under the weight of mounting legal charges and a rapidly closing net of law enforcement. On a crisp December morning, the orphanage reopened its doors. Renamed Callaway Home, it stood as a symbol of hope for the forgotten and vulnerable. Ethan, dressed in a warm coat donated by one of the townsfolk, stood beside Frank as the ribbon was cut. "You did it," Ethan said quietly, his voice trembling with emotion. Frank smiled, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We did it. Your dad would be proud." That evening, as the town celebrated, Ethan and Max wandered the halls of their new home. The once abandoned orphanage now buzzed with life, laughter, chatter, and the promise of a brighter future. Frank watched from a distance, a rare sense of peace settling over him. In the glow of the Christmas lights strung across the orphanage's porch, he saw not just a boy, but a community transformed by kindness and courage. The boy who had once slept in a laundromat now had a place to call home, and the sheriff who had believed in him felt a quiet pride that would linger for years to come.